My brother-in-law had already been married 4 times. Every woman who married him would leave him by the next day, claiming she couldn't stay. It was baffling, curious, and desperate. I decided to arrange his 5th marriage to my 14-year-old sister. On their wedding night, I hid in the room to find out what exactly went wrong every time. Barely 2 hours had passed when I saw 2 men climbing through the window. Earlier that morning, heavy rain had been pouring nonstop. The weather was terrible, a stark contrast to the scorching heat we had been enduring. But when it rains after days of heat, there's a strange, refreshing joy in the air. We had been expecting a family to visit that day to meet my brother-in-law for a marriage proposal, but because of the rain, they couldn't make it. I had prepared a lavish feast for the guests, and since it seemed wasteful to let the food go uneaten, we decided to throw a small family party instead. Everyone in the house gathered, and we enjoyed the food I'd worked so hard to prepare. But my brother-in-law seemed upset. He had been looking forward to meeting the potential bride's family, and their absence clearly soured his mood. "Don't worry," I tried to console him. "If they couldn't come today, they'll surely visit tomorrow." I added teasingly, "Besides, this isn't the first time someone's come to meet you." My sarcastic remark didn't go unnoticed, and he glared at me. "It's not like they're coming to see me for the first time," he snapped angrily. "Whoa, calm down." "I was just joking," I said, trying to diffuse the tension. But he stormed out of the house, leaving me standing there, confused and a little guilty. What did I even say wrong? I only told the truth, I muttered to myself while cleaning up the dishes in the kitchen. This was the 4th time a family was coming to see my brother-in-law for a potential marriage proposal. He had already been married 3 times, but none of his marriages lasted. What was puzzling was that his wives would leave almost immediately. Some didn't even last through the wedding night. One bride left after just 8 days of marriage, saying she was going to visit her parents, and never came back. This situation weighed heavily on all of us. While the rest of the family was happy in their respective lives, my brother-in-law's failed marriages were a source of constant embarrassment. Oddly enough, he wasn't a bad person. He was soft-spoken, polite, and open-minded, qualities that anyone would appreciate. In contrast, my husband was a bit stern, yet I managed to adjust and make things work. But for some reason, none of my brother-in-law's wives could endure staying with him. The accusations were brutal. One wife called him impotent, while others hurled different kinds of insults at him. I was deeply worried. What was going to happen to this boy? His failed marriages didn't just bring shame to him. They affected the whole family. On top of that, I couldn't manage the house on my own. I had hoped that once he settled down, I'd finally have someone to share the household responsibilities with. 6 months ago, I arranged his 3rd marriage, thinking maybe this time it would work. But his wife left, claiming the same thing, that he was impotent. The humiliation was unbearable. My brother-in-law locked himself in the house for days, refusing to face anyone. It took me weeks to convince him to meet his friends and go out again, even just a little. When I first got married and moved into this house, there were only 3 people: my husband, my mother-in-law, and my brother-in-law. I thought to myself, great, it's a small family. There won't be too much work. But I couldn't have been more wrong. My husband's business associates frequently visited, and so did their relatives. I felt like a full-time housekeeper, always cooking and cleaning for the endless stream of guests. I hadn't even had time to fully enjoy my own marriage yet. Overwhelmed by the workload, I convinced my mother-in-law to arrange my brother-in-law's first marriage. To everyone's shock, his first wife left on their wedding night without a trace. She disappeared, leaving no clue as to where she went. My husband and mother-in-law tried their best to resolve the situation, but my brother-in-law refused. She told me on the first night that she wasn't happy and that she loved someone else, he confessed. I can't stay with a woman who has a past like that. After the initial arguments over his failed marriages, we decided to arrange a second marriage for my brother-in-law. But this time, the bride left just 8 days later. Frustrated and confused, we asked him what went wrong. He dismissed it casually, saying he didn't like her. Despite our efforts to reason with him, he remained indifferent. Once again, we chose silence. Then came his 3rd marriage. But shockingly, his 3rd wife left the very first night, accusing him of being impotent. This devastated my brother-in-law. He fell into deep despair, but I tried to console him. Life is full of ups and downs. This too shall pass, I reassured him. Yet I couldn't shake the nagging question. Why wouldn't any woman stay with him? He was good-looking and wealthier than even my husband. He spent most of his days at home, working on his computer, and somehow made a substantial income. Whenever we asked how he earned money, he would vaguely reply, "I do online work," and we let it go at that. This morning he was excited. Another family was coming to meet him for a marriage proposal, but as luck would have it, heavy rain ruined the day, and they couldn't make it. My brother-in-law was visibly disheartened. Days passed in silence, and I began to wonder if there was another way to solve this problem. That's when the idea struck me. I decided to propose my younger sister's hand in marriage to him. My sister, just 16 years old, would be a perfect match for him, I thought. She was young, cheerful, and would also help me with household chores. Plus, with the amount of money my brother-in-law was earning, she would live a comfortable life. I discussed the idea with him, and though he was hesitant at first, he eventually agreed. Wasting no time, I approached my family with the proposal. My parents were initially against it, but my sister herself insisted, and they finally relented. Today was the day my brother-in-law and my sister officially got engaged. I was thrilled. The thought of living under the same roof with my best friend, my sister, was exhilarating. We shared a special bond, and the idea of us being in the same house forever made me incredibly happy. I teased her endlessly about my brother-in-law, and her shy smiles gave away her excitement. Even my brother-in-law seemed genuinely pleased for the first time in ages. The wedding day finally arrived. It was a joyous occasion. My brother-in-law looked happier than I'd ever seen him, and my sister, dressed like a fairy after her salon appointment, looked stunning. After the nikah ceremony, we enjoyed the feast and performed the wedding rituals. We then brought the bride, my sister, back home. For their wedding night, I decorated their room beautifully. After ensuring everything was perfect, I brought my sister into the room, helped her settle in, and then left. But I couldn't suppress my curiosity. I had to know what exactly happened during those first nights that drove every bride away. Why did they all leave, and why did they all hate my brother-in-law? This time, I decided to find out for myself. After dinner, I sent the guests to their rooms, attended to my husband, and slipped into their bedroom unnoticed. I hid under their bed, determined to observe everything that unfolded. My sister was sitting nervously on the bed, her face covered by a long veil. My brother-in-law entered the room, looking ecstatic. He seemed overwhelmed with emotions as he looked at my sister. Her head bowed modestly. I held my breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I was terrified that any small movement might give away my hiding spot under the bed. I held my breath, making sure even my heartbeat didn't betray me. If my brother-in-law discovered me hiding there, it would be beyond humiliating. What would my sister and he think of me? Why was I spying? These thoughts plagued me as my heart pounded faster with every passing moment. When my brother-in-law locked the door, my anxiety grew. I feared my secret would be exposed. He approached the bed and sat down. From under the bed, I could see his dangling feet. He began speaking sweetly to my sister, saying loving and affectionate things. But then, he said something that sent a shiver down my spine. He told my sister that if she agreed to his plan, they could make a lot of money together. Confused, my sister asked what he meant. He revealed his disgusting scheme. He intended to share her with his friends that night in exchange for money. If she refused, he threatened to divorce her. My sister, terrified of the idea of divorce, reluctantly agreed. Listening from under the bed, I felt my blood boil. I wanted to jump out, slap him across the face, and scream at him for his depravity. I couldn't believe I had thrown my innocent 16-year-old sister into the clutches of this monster, but I remained frozen, powerless to stop what was unfolding. Anger welled up inside me, not just at him, but also at my sister for giving in to his vile demands. Moments later, the window creaked open, and two men climbed into the room. They handed my brother-in-law a wad of cash, laughing as they told him they'd give him more if he continued to make them happy. With a disgusting grin, he left the room, shutting the door behind him. Now my sister was alone with the two men. They started making vulgar comments, comparing her to his previous wives. One said, "You're much more beautiful than the other three." The other added, "Yeah, and younger too. Those women were older, but she's like a delicate flower." Hearing this, I realized the horrifying truth. This was why my brother-in-law's previous wives had left him. He had likely subjected them to the same despicable treatment. My sister, trapped by the fear of divorce, was sobbing internally, too afraid to scream. One man grabbed her arm, pulling her close, while the other began kissing her forcefully. She shoved the first man away, but the second one yanked her hair, snarling, "You'll spend every night with us now. No more tantrums. We paid your husband for you." My sister tried to scream, but the man covered her mouth with his hand. From under the bed, I watched helplessly. My rage reached its peak. I quickly grabbed my phone and sent a message to my brother, explaining the situation and asking for help. But in my haste, I forgot to silence my phone. When my brother called back, the sound of the ringtone echoed through the room. The men froze, startled by the noise. One of them began searching for the source of the sound. "Where's that noise coming from?" he muttered. I quickly silenced the phone, but it was too late. One of the men spotted my feet sticking out slightly from under the bed. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me out. I was terrified, but I composed myself as best as I could. Running to my sister, I held her tightly. One of the men sneered, "So you enjoy watching other people's wedding nights? Let's see how you like being part of one." He lunged toward me, but I mustered all my courage and punched him square in the nose. Blood gushed out, and he stumbled backward. Seeing this, the other man became more aggressive. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking me hard. My sister, who had been paralyzed with fear, suddenly grabbed a wooden stick from the corner of the room and struck him on the head. The man groaned in pain and let go of me. My sister quickly unlocked the door. As soon as the door opened, we saw my brother standing there with the police. Relief washed over me as I hugged my sister tightly. The men were arrested on the spot, and my brother ensured they wouldn't harm anyone again. Both my sister and I clung to our brother as tightly as we could. By then, my brother-in-law and other family members had arrived at the scene. My brother signaled to the police, and they immediately arrested the two men. The officers informed us that my brother-in-law would also have to come to the police station, as he was implicated in the crime. Without hesitation, they took him away along with the culprits. Once they were gone, I sat down with my mother-in-law and husband and revealed the horrifying truth about my brother-in-law. I told him he wasn't earning money through online work, as he claimed, but by selling women's dignity to others. I also shared the shocking truth that he wasn't impotent and that his wives hadn't left him of their own accord. He had sold them. The revelation hit my mother-in-law like a thunderbolt, and she suffered a heart attack on the spot. She had always believed her son to be a virtuous man. My husband was deeply ashamed. He apologized to me and my sister repeatedly, saying he had no idea about his brother's true nature. "I always thought he was simple and innocent," my husband admitted, "but he turned out to be a monster, a devil disguised as a man." I silently thanked God that my husband was nothing like his brother. He had always treated me with respect and never betrayed me for money or anything else. While my husband was kind and honorable, his younger brother was the complete opposite, a heartless, despicable man. I couldn't stop thinking about my little sister. Regret filled my heart. How could I have been so blind? If his previous 3 wives couldn't stay with him, how could I expect him to treat my sister any better? I also worried about the lives of the 3 women he had sold. What kind of suffering had they endured because of him? I decided to send my sister back home with our brother. As my brother hugged both of us goodbye, he was visibly distressed. "May Allah give every daughter a good fate," he said, "because it's not daughters themselves we fear. It's their destinies." His eyes kept drifting toward my sister, only 16 years old, whose life had nearly been destroyed by someone who was supposed to be her protector, her husband. When my sister left, I broke down in tears. My husband promised to find a solution to restore my sister's life. He vowed to ensure that his brother faced justice and to help the women who had suffered because of him. My brother-in-law was now facing legal charges. My brother had already filed a police report and paid the authorities to ensure that the case was registered promptly. He wanted justice for his sister and to avenge her humiliation. My sister, whose hands still bore the fading henna of her wedding, seemed to have lost all hope. She looked like someone who had been severed from life itself. I comforted her, promising that I would stand by her side and fight for justice until the very end. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law passed away in the hospital. On her deathbed, she expressed her final wish. She did not want her younger son to see her face one last time. No mother can call herself the mother of a son who disgraces women and becomes the cause of her death, she said. Honoring her will, my brother-in-law was not allowed to attend her funeral. When my husband visited him in custody, he called him his mother's murderer to his face. The case eventually reached court. Under interrogation, the two men revealed that my brother-in-law had sold all three of his wives to them, and they in turn sold them to others. With the help of the police investigation, the three wives were rescued. When they were brought face to face with my brother-in-law, their emotions ranged from relief to anger. The sight of them standing there, alive and ready to testify against him, was a stark reminder of his heinous crimes. Justice was finally within reach. The three women spat in my brother-in-law's face. They expressed sympathy toward me for having lived in the same house as such a man. Before leaving, all three women filed for annulment and requested an immediate divorce from him. The court accepted their plea and promised them justice. My brother-in-law was no longer able to face any of his relatives. He remained in jail, utterly disgraced. The same wealth he had amassed by trading away women's dignity had become the very chain that bound him. The day of the court's final verdict arrived. My sister was summoned to testify. As she stood in court, she bravely recounted every detail of her ordeal. The lawyer's questions were met with honest and straightforward answers, as she revealed the full extent of what had happened. The judge, after hearing my testimony, my sister's, and the accounts of others, delivered a decisive verdict. My brother-in-law was sentenced to life imprisonment, while the two men involved in trafficking women were sentenced to death. Their greed and lust had brought about their downfall, and my brother-in-law would now spend the rest of his life behind bars. I suggested to my husband that if he wished to see his brother released, he should demand that he swear to leave all illicit activities, earn an honest living, and build a respectable life. My husband, however, refused outright. A person who can betray once will find it easy to betray again, he said. He deserves exactly where he is now. He played with the dignity of others, and now his own dignity lies in ruins. His words reassured me and won my heart. My husband was an honorable man, and I silently thanked God for that. Meanwhile, my sister's waiting period for her divorce had ended. My parents began looking for a suitable match for her, hoping to find someone who could restore her happiness. But she flatly refused. "I can't trust men anymore," she said. The trauma of her wedding night still haunted her, and she had resolved never to marry again. Despite my attempts to comfort her, she grew distant. "Don't interfere in my life," she said one day. "Everything that happened to me was because of you." Her words pierced my heart. A single decision of mine had destroyed her entire life. She began living like a widow, withdrawn from everything and everyone. I wanted her to reclaim her life, but she couldn't. She started teaching at a private school and spent her days surrounded by children. She also decided to resume her education, asking our parents for permission to continue her studies. "I want to stand on my own 2 feet," she said, "so that no man can ever trade my dignity for money again." Her words filled me with shame and regret. Because of me, she had gone from a lively, carefree girl to a broken shell of herself. She was still so young, her innocence hadn't even faded from her face. She had been the most cherished member of our family, but life has a way of testing those we cherish the most. Around this time, I discovered that I was pregnant. When the doctor confirmed the news, my husband was overjoyed. Despite everything, there was a sense of happiness returning to our lives. My brother-in-law, however, remained in prison, counting the days of his wasted life. His greed had led him to ruin. That's why people say it's better to live a modest, honest life than to indulge in tainted wealth. As my pregnancy progressed, I found myself praying to God, "Please don't give me a daughter. I could never bear the pain of a daughter with a tragic fate."